get him to do it?
I get him to do it?
He killed Miriam, didn't he? Tell me, didn't he?
Yes. He's a maniac. I met him on the train going to Metcalf. He had some crazy scheme about exchanging murders. I'd do his murder, he'd do mine.
What do you mean? You're a murder guy.
He read about me in the papers. He knew about Miriam, about you. He suggested that if he got rid of Miriam for me, I should kill his father.
You must have known he was talking nonsense.
But he wasn't. Of course I didn't give it another thought. And now a lunatic wants me to kill his father.
It's too fantastic.
Yes, isn't it?
You mean you've known about Miriam all this time?
Since the first night. He gave me her glasses.
Why didn't you call the police?
And have them say what you did. Mr. Haynes, how did you get him to do it? And Bruno would say we planned it together.
Guy, what are we gonna do?
I don't know, and I don't know.
Just one intense scene from Alfred Hitchcock's classic film Strangers on a Train, and the man in that clip, who seems to be in a predicament that's extremely hard to get out of, is Farley Granger, one of the subjects of tonight's special edition of Take Two, the movie program. In fact, tonight, tackling two completely different subjects. We've got a lot of ground to cover. And to have this discussion with me, it's my very good friend, the one guy that I want to have this discussion with, these two discussions with. It's the one, the only Bob Whiteford.
And across the aisle from me, the undisputed czar of film on the Central Coast. You know him, I know him, our buddy Jim Dee. And Jimmy, let's get rolling here.
Yeah, you know what's great about this show, Bob? What I love about it is the fact that we can put the spotlight on an actor who had a really pretty amazing career and in some great classic films, although the name Farley Granger maybe isn't a household name. It's sort of a name that, I'm kind of familiar with that name. Maybe you can't call up the handsome face of Farley Granger, but a really interesting career. We did lose him just recently. Farley Granger, born in San Jose, California on July 1st, 1925. He passed away March 27th, 2011. He was living in Manhattan. An incredible career of screen appearances, also a lot of work on television. But we're just going to pull out a handful of films that he appeared in. Really, it was a real treat to look back at some of the work of Farley Granger. Didn't really catch up on a lot of his television work, but at least visiting those two classic Hitchcock films, Strangers on a Train, and the next film we'll be talking about, Rope, and then appearing in some really great film noirs, appearing also with some great directors, and also going to Europe to do some work over there. A very interesting, very prolific screen actor, Farley Granger.
Well, Jimmy, I think it's worth noting Farley Granger was probably the last, or one of the last, of the Sam Goldwyn stars. Sam Goldwyn, the independent producer who also worked with Hitchcock and did a lot of great films on his own, had his own stable of stars. And Farley Granger was signed at a very young age to be one of Sam Goldwyn's big stars. He started out in 1943, the film The North Star, directed by Louis Millstone, a film about the German invasion of Russia. And over the years, this film got chopped to pieces because it was, made during World War II, screenplay by Lillian Hellman, very pro-Russian or pro-Soviet, maybe that's more appropriate. And sadly, I don't think it survived in its original version, but he made quite an impression in this film, as did another Sam Goldwyn star, the great Dana Andrews. And then I think the next year, 1944, he did the classic World War II movie, The Purple Heart, again with Dana Andrews, Richard Conte. And I think his appeal, Jimmy, was He was the boy next door, the nice boy next door, like Kathy O'Donnell, his co-star in They Live by Night and Side Street, was the girl next door. You might remember her from the classic Best Years of Our Lives. She's Harold Russell's girlfriend who lives next door, Harold Russell being the fellow who lost his hands in the war. And I think that was part of his appeal, Jimmy. He definitely was a very handsome fellow, very urbane, and also kind of an everyman. As we saw with the clip from Strangers on the Train, here he is, this fellow, he's still married to a shrew who's been impregnated by another man, and he's met and fallen in love with Ruth Roman, who's the daughter of a senator played by Leo G. Carroll, almost like a Place in the Sun, except this one is done by Hitchcock and not George Stevens, so it takes a very sinister turn. And I liked what you said there, Jimmy. How does a decent guy get himself out of a seemingly impossible trap laid for him by the let's just say, one of the great Hitchcock villains, Bruno, played by Robert Walker.
Wow.
Great film.
It is a great film. It's too bad we don't have more from it, but hopefully you listen to our opening clip. And, Bob, the classic Hitchcock, shall we say, plot element is, the innocent who gets sucked into something where he just doesn't have any control over it. In this one, Strangers on a Train, it's Farley Granger on a train, and this conversation, which seems to be too fantastic to come true, about, well, let's do away with each other's undesirable members of our family. In one case, a wife, another case, a father. But, the thing about this film also we visit is the fact that Robert Walker is, well, a homosexual. The plus side is the fact that it adds sort of a dimension to the film that, wasn't really, how can I put, routine.
Right, very different.
However, on the downside, I can also think of Rebecca, where I forget what her name was, the woman who took care of Rebecca's clothes was, obviously in love with her. Unfortunately, in all these films, the stereotype of the gay person is not a very good one.
Right.
We can also go to Hitchcock's Frenzy, where the necktie strangler also was a homosexual. But what I found fascinating in Strangers on a Train is just the way it plays. I mean, you can almost tell Farley Granger with those drop-dead good looks, and here's Robert Walker not only boiling up this scheme, but probably falling in love with him as well. But again, a very, shall we say, dangerous lover, in the fact that Robert Walker has the whole thing figured out, and Farley Granger almost couldn't help but fall into this trap.
Yeah, I mean, Bruno really sets a heavy trap for him. I remember when we were looking at clips, this is the one part I do remember, where he's walking with the policeman, Farley Granger, and they're in Washington, D.C., and in the distance is Robert Walker's Bruno standing by one of the monuments, the Jefferson Monument, I think it was. And how chilling that looked. And this is out in the middle of a gorgeous day. And the stance that he has, the way he's looking at him from the distance, it's like whatever Farley Granger does, Robert Walker always seems to be a couple of steps ahead of him. Not only is he crazy, but he's brilliant as well. And Strangers on the Train, one of the great Hitchcock films. And Farley Granger, worth noting, he's just such a fascinating presence, because it seems like in all the scenes we were looking at, he's there, and everybody, it's like he's the straight man, and it gives everybody a chance to kind of open up their secrets to him. He just stands there in a way, and they open up.
Well, another scene we don't have a clip for, but again, the Hitchcock touch is in this film. Farley Granger is a professional tennis player, and there he is, and he's going to play a match or something. And he looks in the stands, and we see Robert Walker. He's also stunned to Farley Granger's stunned to see him there. And as the volley goes back and forth of the tennis game, everyone in the stands' heads are moving back and forth. Robert Walker's heads are straight ahead staring at Farley Granger. Maybe I've described it not as well as it is to see
It's a chilling scene. Brilliant.
It's brilliant. And the fact, like you said, it's in the open, it's in the daytime, and yet Hitchcock had this way of creating tension and, as you said, chilling. And it's just a guy staring straight ahead, whereas all the heads in the bleachers are moving back and forth with the volley of the tennis ball. Well, to highlight Farley Granger's great acting ability, do check out Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. And we are working a little bit out of order here because there is another Alfred Hitchcock film, which is kind of an experiment that Farley Granger was in along with Jimmy Stewart and John Dahl, called Rope. The experiment is the fact that what Hitchcock achieved in this film is the fact that the film is essentially one take. It is in, shall we say, the running time of the film is the actual time of the on-screen story. It's kind of stagey. There's a murder involved, and there's some great dialogue. But I think Rope, with Farley Granger, kind of shows his true acting ability, because a lot of actors, I tend to think, put them on the stage, see how well they fare. You know, when you're doing something as theatrical as Rope is, I mean, you've got to maintain the scene. You've got to go. I mean, the trick behind Rope was the fact that, you know, film came in 10-minute reels, and so each take is 10 minutes. Everybody has to hit their mark. I mean, it tends to be a little bit stiff, maybe, and again, theatrical. But I want to mention for Farley Granger, and of course everyone involved in this film, boy, you had to be dead on. You had to deliver the dialogue. You had to be right in the right place. If you weren't, hey, the film would run out, and you know, you wouldn't have the scene. So.
Well, you know, it's worth noting, Jimmy, I mean, Farley Granger was quite a stage actor, and he's terrific in Rope. And for folks who haven't seen it, and it's kind of Hitchcock's take on the Leopold Loeb murders of, I think it was the 30s, where these two young, wealthy, effete, possibly homosexual, well, there we go with that again.
Yeah, well,
killed some boy for basically to see if they could get away with it. I think the story was retold in 1959 in a film called Compulsion, with Bradford Dillman and Dean Stockwell as the Leopold and Loeb characters, and Orson Welles as their attorney. But that's a whole other story. This is Hitchcock's version, and it's quite fascinating. I mean, the tension between John Dahl and Farley Granger is really interesting. John Dahl he's a little over the top in this, and I got to admit, I kind of like it. And
Me too.
Farley Granger, his character, he gets kind of broken down bit by bit, and Jimmy Stewart's character is onto him almost immediately, and it's really interesting seeing Jimmy Stewart kind of go to work on Farley Granger and break him. And, you know, I think this is Jimmy Stewart's first film for Hitchcock. I believe, yeah, maybe after World War II, and this is where Hitch is dialing in the darker side of Jimmy Stewart. This is a fascinating film, and I think, you know, maybe unjustly got a little lost, maybe, I don't know. But Rope is wonderful. Farley Granger is great in this.
Well, Rope was one of the Hitchcock films that sort of went out of circulation. I want to say about 10, 15 years ago. Universal did re-release a number of them that had been unavailable. Rope was one of them. And truly, it is an experiment. I mean, the idea that it's one take, essentially. But again, like you said, the acting and the tension that's created by this very interesting dialogue really works. Here's a scene from Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. This is after a party was held in this, you know, you essentially are in this apartment for the entire movie, but there is a dead body in a chest, and John Dahl thinks of it as an incredible success, maybe humorously so, in the fact that they were able to conceal a dead body, throw a party. In fact, the food is being served off of this case where the body is. Of course, Jimmy Stewart gets really close to it. And after the party, here is the so-called celebration, and the fact they pulled off this rather nasty get-together with a dead body in the room, but nobody gets to see it. Here's a scene with John Dahl and Farley Granger in Rope.
Thank you for a lovely evening. Good night, good night. It's been charming. Oh, Philip, this party really deserves to go down in history. Well, come on, it's over. And it couldn't have gone more beautifully.
Yes, it could. Without Rupert.
Oh, but he was brilliant. He helped me say all the things I've wanted to say to those idiots. He gave the party the very touch I predicted.
The touch of what? Prying? Snooping? Or just plain pumping? Do you know how busy he was questioning me?
About what?
Oh, what difference? You were busy in there arranging that other little touch of yours.
What touch?
Tying up the books that way.
Oh, I thought that was wonderful. Didn't you like it?
No, Brandon, I didn't like it. One bit. He'll ruin everything with your neat little touches.
Quiet, Mrs. Wilson's still here.
That's Farley Granger and John Dahl in Rope, and you know what's being discussed there, and what really put Farley Granger off is the fact that there were some books that were tied together with a rope, and that was the rope that did the dirty work. And again, I think also, you know, Hitchcock uses the idea of a rope and the fact that it's one continuous take. I mean, it's an unbroken film, so to speak, from beginning to end, essentially one take. But you can feel that tension in that scene where John Dahl is having a time of his life as far as deceiving everyone, and Farley Granger is not having a good time. Of course, like you said, he was grilled heavily by Jimmy Stewart.
Well, you know, this sets the table for the next film. We go from Rope to Nicholas Ray, one of the great unsung American filmmakers. It's someone we really have to visit somewhere down the road. And his 1949 film noir classic, They Live by Night. This film kind of presages Bonnie and Clyde, Gun Crazy, young couple, handsome young couple, Farley Granger and Kathy O'Donnell. On the run from the law, Farley Granger's an escaped convict. His fellow ex-cons, J.C. Flippin, and, oh gosh, I can't quite remember the other fella's name, but classic film noir setup. But there's something about Farley that's kind of interesting in this. Yeah, he's an ex-con. Yeah, he has a criminal past. Yeah, he broke out with these guys to commit more crimes. But then he meets this gal at a hideout, and so it touches something in both of them where they become two kids in love, and that becomes more important than anything else. And of course, they're in a situation where they can't break out. They try, and you're rooting for them to do so. And considering the times that it was made, Jimmy, you'd think that the filmmaker would let it happen, but it doesn't. And that's kind of the beauty of this film. It really elevates it to a whole other level. Aside from the fact that it's got some great camera work, in fact, I think it's one of the first movies to ever incorporate helicopter camera work. When they break out of the big house, a lot of the escape is shot from the sky, from an early helicopter, a shot that's pretty common nowadays, but this is for what I can tell, the first time I've seen it incorporated in a film, and to great effect. Nicholas Ray was a very innovative filmmaker. You might remember him from such films as Rebel Without a Cause, and, that's a classic. For lovers of film noir, They Live by Night easily one of the greats.
Easily one of the greats. It's from 1949, and we'll play you a clip from They Live by Night. In this scene, Farley Granger has broken out of the clink, and he's looking for a possible, escape, which is, or someone to come pick him up at a designated point. In this scene, he approaches a truck that's having a hard time starting, and there is Kathy O'Donnell in there, kind of dressed up more like a guy. She almost looks like, you get close, I think she has braids in it, but, at first you're not even sure whether it's who it is, and Farley Granger is not sure who it is either. So here's the first get-together of these two, Farley Granger and Kathy O'Donnell, in They Live by Night.
You having trouble?
Could be.
Who are you? You live around here?
Could be.
You haven't had a couple of visitors lately, have you?
That wouldn't be a sore foot making you limp, would it?
Could be.
I got some other stuff to pick up. Get in or we'll both get pneumonia.
They took their own sweet time sending for me. Who are you?
They sent this for you. Get in.
From the film They Live by Night, and it's a great noir, as Bob said. I mean, this is a very dark film, and what I think is great, Bob, and we'll also see that in the next film we'll talk about with Farley Granger called Side Street. One of the elements of film noir is, shall we say, morally ambiguous characters. I mean, we can even talk about Humphrey Bogart in Big Sleep or Maltese Falcon, where, they're going for justice, but, if they're going to get something out of it, they're not squeaky clean, let's just say.
No.
And I think Farley Granger in They Live by Night, he's kind of a tough guy in this. I mean, he does seem like he's rough and tumble, but again, it's this love story that erupts in the film that finds another side to him, which actually adds an interesting dimension to the rather dark proceedings in They Live by Night. Same in our next film called Side Street.
I think that's a great point, Jimmy. And because They Live by Night was such a great film, well, what do you know? MGM decides they're going to reteam Farley Granger and Kathy O'Donnell in Anthony Mann's classic film noir Side Street. And Anthony Mann, one of the great, like Nicholas Ray, one of the great unheralded American filmmakers. You might remember him from quite a few of those great 1950s westerns with Jimmy Stewart, Naked Spur and The Man from Laramie comes to mind right away. I think his last film was Heroes of Telemark from 1965 with Kirk Douglas and Richard Harris, both chewing a lot of scenery. Great filmmaker, not well known. And this is it's just another terrific film noir. Farley, nice guy, part-time postman. He's a veteran, married, living in a flat with his wife who he adores, and he only wants good things for her. He doesn't really, he just wants his life to be good. Decent guy. And then one day he goes to deliver a letter at some mobster's place, and the opportunity to steal $30,000, which is laying on a desk, is just too great for him. And just in a moment of weakness, he grabs the dough and bolts out of there. Seemingly, you'd think all his troubles are over, but this is film noir. His troubles are just beginning. And in the process, everything he holds dear, from his lovely wife, who's now going to have a child, his, just whatever possibilities he has for life, everything is suddenly turned upside down, and he is on the verge of losing everything quite badly and horribly if he's not killed. This is a wonderful film, shot on location in New York City, not unlike The Naked City, which came out a few years before that. Great shots of old New York. Highly recommended. I gotta say, Jimmy, first time I saw this, I was so frustrated. It's like, Farley, don't do this. And then every step of the way, he's trying to take control of the situation, and he's one step behind the pro criminals, and he's just getting in deeper and deeper and deeper, and you're just... It's almost frustrating watching him. It's like watching a Jerry Lewis movie. You're just getting frustrated because you know bad things are going to happen. This is in a different way. Highly recommend Side Street. Wonderful film noir.
That's the film Bob's talking about, Side Street, and here is a clip from that film, and here is that bit of temptation that took Farley Granger, off the deep end. He confesses it, but again, we're talking about film noir, and of course that frailty of, morality, and he tries and tries and tries and fails. Farley Granger from Side Street.
Darling. What's wrong?
Yes, honey. Somebody may come in. I got in through the fire escape. Now you gotta hold on and listen. I've done something horrible. I tried to tell you yesterday, but when I saw the baby...
Is it Joe? What is it?
Oh, I'd give anything at all not to hurt you. You gotta believe that. That money I gave you, I didn't borrow it, I stole it.
Oh, Joe.
That and a lot more. $30,000. I don't know why I did it. I knew it was wrong, crazy wrong. I must have known that. I had the stupid notion that a couple $100 could cure everything. You wouldn't have to have the baby in a charity ward. I'd build up a feeling of shame because everywhere I turned, people had things I wanted you to have.
Oh.
That is Farley Granger from Side Street, and again, big confession there, but of course you take that plunge, that one plunge of temptation, and in a film noir, boy, you gotta...
It's not just wrong, Jimmy. It's crazy wrong.
It's crazy wrong. Well, our tribute to Farley Granger could go on and on. There's a number of other films that he appeared in, and looking over his filmography here, he did do a ton of television work, but our final film that we want to talk about is a very interesting turn in a film by the great Italian director Luchino Visconti. It's called Senso, and it's kind of interesting, Bob. Here's an American actor who was called over to Europe to star in this epic. It's a big budgeted film. It's set in the 18th century.
1860.
Yes.
It's about the birth of Italy, the War of Secession between where Italy fights for its independence against the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It features the lovely Valley. We might remember her from The Third Man, Joseph Cotton's. He's crazy about her, but she's in love with Orson Welles' Harry Lime. A huge star in Europe back in the day. This 1954 Technicolor production, this is really kind of a change of pace. Remember, we would talk about Italian neorealism after World War II. This film was a departure. It's shot in Technicolor. It's a big production, Jimmy. There's big battle scenes, lush operatic scenes set up. It's just an incredible film, way ahead of its time. And it echoes or harkens Visconti's 63 classic, The Leopard. Called The Italian Gone with the Wind. It's an epic film with Burt Lancaster, Alain Delon, Claudia Cardinale. We could talk about that some other time, but this is kind of the precursor to this. Farley Granger is brought on board because they need a name actor. A lot of times in Europe back at this time, they needed an American star. And somebody else was, I think it was Brando, was originally contracted to do the film, and he couldn't do it. He had I think it had to do with On the Waterfront. He wasn't able to get over there to do it, so they had to find somebody. So Visconti found Farley Granger, who at that time was a big star. What's interesting about this is Farley Granger shows up on the set, And he kind of pulls a star turn. You know, one day during the shooting, he kind of disappeared. He just kind of waltzed off into Venice or something and decided he was taking a day off. Well, the next day when he showed up on the set, he kind of waltzes in, apologizes, and Visconti comes up and slaps him right in the face in front of the entire cast and crew.
Whoa.
I mean, Visconti, a man of unbridled passion and auteur of the first magnitude, will not be slighted by some movie star antics. Once they got past that, actually it seemed to kind of pull Farley Granger into the film, and he's quite good in this as the Austro-Hungarian Lieutenant Mahler, who's a playboy, and Valley, she plays a Italian countess who's involved with the resistance, yet her resistance romantically is non-existent to this playboy played by Farley Granger. Wonderful film. It's really, really a fun watch.
It's worth seeking out. Criterion has released this, plus the very rare English language version of the film Senso. Let's hear a clip of from the film. Here is the first encounter with Valley and Farley Granger in Senso.
When I saw that officer again, I realized that he was the cause of all my worries. And that for days I had actually been dreading the thought of encountering him.
Contessa Serpieri?
What is it?
Would you allow me to give you safe conduct through this quarter?
No, thank you, Lieutenant Mahler.
There's a curfew in Venice, and it's 2 hours past.
Are you going to have me arrested for being out after the curfew?
I don't believe in having people arrested for little infractions of the law.
What about the arrest of Roberto Ussoni?
Oh? Was he arrested? I thought he was just sent somewhere for a while.
He has been exiled, and you know it.
You think it was all my fault. I assure you, you're wrong. I hope you believe me. I think that Ussoni probably enjoys it. He's the type that was born to be a martyr to some noble cause.
What were you born to be?
What I am, exactly.
Exactly. Good night.
That's a scene from Senso, worth seeking out, and an interesting performance in the fact that here's Farley Granger over in Europe as an American movie star, as you said, Bob. Well, we are going to switch gears, but we would like you to check out the filmography, some films with the great Farley Granger, and hopefully not really a household name, but as you said, Bob, he was a pretty big star back in late 40s, 50s, and continued a lot of work even up to in the 90s and in the year past 2000. Very active in television work, but a very interesting filmography from a name that hopefully we've turned into a bit of a household name, Farley Granger. We will be back with a very different subject here on Take Two in a moment. You're listening to Take Two on public radio for the entire Central Coast of California. KCBX and KCBX HD1, San Luis Obispo, KSBX, Santa Barbara, KNBX, San Ardo. Streaming worldwide at kcbx.org, where you can also find the Take Two program archives. If you'd like to write to the program, the address is movies@kcbx.org. Take Two is also featured at npr.org.
Support for KCBX is provided by Cal Poly Arts and Otter Productions, presenting The Moody Blues at the PAC, Wednesday, May 18th at 7:30. Information and tickets available at 756-2787 or at pacslow.org.
Take Two is sponsored by the 2012 San Luis Obispo International Film Festival. Complete information available at slowfilmfest.org. We continue now with Take Two, Part 2 of a show where, usually we don't tackle two subjects in one show, but there was a subject that we really wanted to take on which reflected things going on in our country. Just a couple of months ago, they're still going on. And, we should just open up with a song to get us into the mood of what we're going to be talking about. Here is the one, the only Charlie Chaplin.
J'ai notre soccatore, j'ai notre citavore, j'ai la tula tilatoire. La spinach o la bouchon, si grete punta bello, si racchi spaghetto, j'ai la tula tilatoire. Signora Pilassina, voulez-vous la teximita? Le giunta sulla cita. Tula, wa.
That's the voice of Charlie Chaplin, probably the first time you ever heard his voice in the 1936 classic Modern Times. And what a great way to open up our discussion on what happened in Wisconsin in this country. And again, this is not a political show, this is a movie show. But when we talk about the people storming whatever it was there in Wisconsin, talking about unions, and the governor of Wisconsin talking about union busting and the fact that union members would perhaps not be able to go to the bargaining table and talk about their job, their place of work, the safety at their work, perhaps some security of wages or whatever it may be. And Bob and I just felt that the subject of unions may not be something that our local newscasts will tell you about, or what makes a union, or why there are two opposing sides that seem to be butting with each other. And so we just felt that what better way to get a little bit more education, maybe a little bit more of a perspective on what unions are. And of course, as we've done many times in the past, picking a subject, sometimes seeing a film about unions, about the working man or woman, can come a little more clear by watching a film. By starting with Modern Times, I got to say that Chaplin's genius is apparent in this film. It's Modern Times from 1936 seemed to be the Modern Times of 2011. The working conditions and the fact that Charlie Chaplin, as the tramp, but he has a job here, the job is not always there. The strikes are always happening. The conditions of the workers are not that great. And also in Modern Times, of course, we have the so-called corporate boss who is always turning up the conveyor belt, turning up the machine so that the workers are working harder and harder. It's a film for the ages, but it really perfectly reflects what's going on, and it's still going on in Wisconsin, and I believe also in Michigan, where workers are really trying to get for those, keep those bargaining rights. Democracy in the workplace is basically what it is. And Bob, I was also thinking that our country is also sort of has a union feel to it, in order to form a more perfect union, and we all vote on certain things. So the idea of a union is sort of the bedrock of the foundations of this country.
Well, Jimmy, Modern Times came out in 1936, as you noted, the first Chaplin talkie. And I think at that time, this is when the labor movement in this country in particular was really starting to gain steam, and there were a lot of violent confrontations. I think about some of the strikes at the Ford Motor Company that got violent. There was also an attack on some strikers in Colorado where the company would hire thugs to go beat people to death for fighting for their rights. And those rights included, a 5-day work week, 40-hour days. This stuff didn't just come from the kindness of somebody's heart. People had to fight for this. And films like Modern Times in 1936 and the next film, 1938's Grapes of Wrath, really exemplify this. What's interesting when you compare and contrast these films, yes, we know Chaplin's politics were left of center, and he used comedy as a metaphor very effectively. I think about this film where he's literally in the conveyor belt and in the machine just being, spun all over the place. I know on my job, when I feel kind of overwhelmed, that image always seems to go through my head. Grapes of Wrath is a little different because here you have John Steinbeck wrote the story and John Ford. Now, John Ford is not a bleeding heart. In fact, I think it's safe to say he was pretty conservative with his politics. However, he makes a film that's very much a plea for the working man, and it's also it's a plea for, not a plea so much as like pointing out like how lousy conditions are for the pickers, the Okies, all the cruelties they had to endure, and also the hope that organizing and government programs of the New Deal could give people where they could get a chance to live their lives again with some dignity. And I remember we did that show in Paso Robles a few years ago on the Grapes of Wrath, and this film is a powerful, powerful statement. I mean, you couple this with John Ford's How Green Was My Valley, which is also kind of a love letter to Welsh coal miners and the cruelty they had to endure. And again, from a conservative. And I think back in those days, people wanted a fair deal. And they weren't saying, I'm a liberal, I'm a conservative. There were people that wanted a fair deal for the working man and people that did not. And that's the difference in those days. It wasn't, at least that I can see in terms of film. We're talking the realm of film here. And Grapes of Wrath, probably one of the greatest American films ever made, and it's all about working class people and poor people fighting for their dignity. Wonderful film.
Here's a clip from Grapes of Wrath, and it's the Jode family, and of course they would like to get some work, and here's the predicament that they encounter. This is from the Grapes of Wrath.
You men want to work?
Sure we want to work. Where's it at?
Tavares County. Fruit's opening up. Need a lot of fruit pickers.
You doing the hiring?
Well, I'm contracting the land.
What you paying?
Well, can't tell exactly yet. About 30 cents, I guess.
Why can't you tell? You took the contract, didn't you?
That's true, but it's key to the price. Might be a little more, might be a little less.
All right, mister, I'll go. You just show us your license to contract. Then you make out an order. Where and when and how much you're going to pay. And you sign it and we'll go.
Now listen, smart guy. I'll run my business my own way. I got work. If you want to take it, okay. If not, just sit here, that's all.
Twice now I fell for that line. Maybe he needs 1,000 men. So he gets 5,000 there and he'll pay 15 cents an hour. And you guys will have to take it because you'll be hungry. If he wants to hire men, let him write it out and say what he's going to pay. Ask to see his license. He ain't allowed by law to contract men without a license.
Hey, Joe. Agitator. Ever see this guy before?
Seems like I have. Seems like I seen him hanging around a used car lot that was busted into. Yep, that's the fella. Get in this car.
Got nothing on him.
Open your trap again and you'll go too.
Now, you fellas don't want to listen to troublemakers. You better all pack up and come on up to Tavares County.
Come on, you.
Well, there's that conflict between the worker and the person who is providing the work. But again, is it pro-worker or is it pro-profit? Obviously, that whole dynamic plays out in The Grapes of Wrath, as you said, the great John Ford directing that film. And it's interesting, too, in this film where the Joad family ends up at that so-called government-funded campground, I guess you would call it. And it's sort of... flies in the face of some of the concerns of today, where here's a government-run place, and it seems to run very smoothly. It's depicted in The Grapes of Wrath. A great film, as you said, great American film.
Absolutely, Jimmy.
Well, as we talk about unions in film, to give us a little more understanding of some of the things going on in today's headlines, we come to one of the classics of all time, and probably most of our listeners would know where we're going to go here, On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando. And we got to mention Lee J. Cobb in here. And of course, Bob, it's interesting because we talk about unions and the benefits that they give to workers. But of course, the idea of the union can be abused, and the workers can be taken advantage of as well. And that's, incredibly portrayed in this classic film, On the Waterfront. And, we're not going to play the great scene with Rod Steiger and Marlon Brando in the car. But again, that's almost a good metaphor for the union. Here's two brothers who want to stick by each other. The union of the two brothers could have been a contender if you would have stuck up for me, Charlie.
Right.
So there's that dynamic that plays out in the back of, I guess, a taxi cab On the Waterfront. But we find out more about the plight of the workers, the abuse of the workers in On the Waterfront.
This film, I think, is really interesting, Jimmy, on a lot of levels. Came out in 1954. This is America post-Depression, post-World War II. People are starting to earn money. Things are starting to get better. What we're seeing with this film is, this is a bad apple. How a corrupt individual can do a lot of harm in a position where he could do a lot of good, as portrayed by Lee J. Cobb as Johnny Friendly. The subtext to this film is kind of interesting, too, because we also have... This is kind of a, what I would call a mea culpa for Bud Schulberg, the screenwriter, and the director, Elia Kazan. As we know, they became informants during the HUAC process. Mm-hmm. Now, the main character of this film, Terry Malloy, he, quote-unquote, sings to the cops. To make a long story short, I'm not into condemning anybody for choices they made. That was a tough situation. I mean, Brando didn't. Kazan did. Their relationship was really damaged by it. In fact, because they had made so many great films together, Streetcar Named Desire, Viva Zapata, and then this. But their relationship was ruined forever over Kazan's testimony to the HUAC committee. That being said, this kind of adds an interesting subtext to this film as well. And this is something I like to go back and revisit this film quite a bit, because you got Carl Malden as the priest. He's kind of the moral core. He wants what's best for the people. He wants to make sure that all the workers, are taken care of. They're his flock. They're his constituents. He's organizing them, and the thugs attack the church and beat them all up. It's a pretty powerful film even to this day. And the scene at the end where Brando calls out Lee J. Cobb, who incidentally I think was also, he also testified against some people. But I don't want to hold that against him. I always like Lee J. Cobb. For crying out loud, I watch In Like Flint and Our Man Flint. I can't. How could I be mad at this guy who came out of the womb 54 years old? I mean, you just got a sense the minute he was born, he had that mustache and a cigar, and he was a middle-aged guy. I always kind of liked him a great deal. But I think this is a film where we see, the fat of the land, and it's being abused, and it's got its own message. And this is a fascinating film of the ages.
Here's Marlon Brando as Terry Malloy standing up to the bad apple, Lee J. Cobb, in the classic film On the Waterfront.
Hey, Friendly! John Friendly, come out of there! Friendly! Come on out of there!
You want to know the trouble with you? You think it makes you a big man if you give the answers. Well, at the right time, I'll catch up with you. Be thinking about that. Now go on, beat it. Don't push your luck.
Wait a minute, you! You take them heaters away from you and you're nothing, you know that?
You talk yourself in the river.
You take the good goods away and the kickbacks and the shakedown cabbage and the pistol arrows and you're nothing. Your guts is all in your wallet and your trigger finger, you know that?
You ratted on us, Terry.
From where you stand, maybe, but I'm standing over here now. I was ratting on myself all them years, I didn't even know it.
Come on!
You give it to Joey, you give it to Dugan, you give it to Charlie, it was one of your own. You think you're God Almighty, but you know what you are?
Come on!
You're a cheap, lousy, dirty, stinking mug. And I'm glad what I done to you. You hear that? I'm glad what I done. And I'm gonna keep on doing it till I get... Come
On where do you go from there? On the Waterfront, Marlon Brando taking on Lee J. Cobb, who is abusing the workers. But again, here's Brando standing up for the working man, and it's a fabulous film. And again, very, as you mentioned, Bob, multi-layered. There's a lot going on in this film.
A lot going on. It's the kind of great film where every time you see it, you see something new. And the more you learn about the people who made the film, the more things you see. This is one of the greatest films ever made, and for good reason.
We're talking about unions being depicted in films, or the working man, the working woman, kind of reflecting what's going on in today's headlines. And of course, you're probably knowing the film we're going to go to next, which starred Sally Field. And maybe we know her Oscar acceptance speech better than the film, but we're talking about her triumphant performance in Norma Ray. And again, the clip we're going to play for you is the background noise is in a sweatshop-like factory. It could be the same factory that Charlie Chaplin was working in modern times. And again, we see the abuse of the workers, and here in this film, Norma Ray, portrayed by Sally Field, is that galvanizing, that unionizing voice and spirit. And what's great about when I was watching some of this, Bob, Sally Field is tiny. I mean, even just amongst the men that she works with in the film, I mean, they sort of tower over her. So this really, this fireball that she portrays in the film, she's really something else. And, we like her. We really like her.
Yes, we do, Jimmy. And, I kind of like that analogy. I mean, she's small in stature, but big in courage. She's a giant in her own way. And, interestingly enough, Martin Ritt, who directed this film, was blacklisted in the 50s. And it's worth noting that this film, this is all about the process. A union organizer shows up at the factory. He's not getting anywhere. He needs somebody on the inside to want to help him. Without support from the workers somewhere, someone's got to stand up. He has no in. And sure enough, she steps up to the plate. And this is a fantastic film, and she definitely deserved the Academy Award for this. She was wonderful. great film.
Here's a clip from Norma Ray, and again, the background noise, the fact that these scenes take place in the factory, but listen, and she's quite a fireball. Here's Sally Field and Norma Ray.
Where?
You can't copy this letter.
It's up on the bulletin board. I'm going to copy it.
Norma, you better not.
I'm going to take down every word of this letter. It's my break time, and I'm going to take down every word of this letter. Just stay out of my way. I'm going to take down every word of this letter. Her. Stripes.
Hello, Norma.
Mr. Mason, you know who I am. Means.
Norma, put the pencil and paper away. You stop what you're doing right now. You're going to leave.
Hey.
The law's going to come after you and take you right out of this plant.
Jobs. Mr. Mason, I started this, and I'm going to finish it. Serious violence.
Let's go to my office, Norma. Why did you make those personal phone calls on company time?
I want you all to spell out your names for me.
Don't be foolish, Norma Ray.
Mr. Mason, no one around here is on my side, and I'm not going to leave until I set down all your names on this piece of paper.
Lady, I want you off the premises now. You phone your husband, you come over here and tell him to fetch you. I want you out of here right quick.
Scene from Norma Ray and that Spitfire, Sally Field. And you know, Bob, there's this thread going through all of these clips from these films about social issues, about labor issues, and the fact the so-called agitator is in The Grapes of Wrath. And, you know, Charlie Chaplin spends a lot of time in and out of jail in modern times as he's perceived as an agitator. Terry Malloy on The Waterfront. It's the person who seems to be standing up for the working man or woman is viewed as the agitator, and here we have that just sort of that universal conflict that comes up in all of these films. I'm not sure if we have enough time to hit a couple more clips here, but of course 2 more films that we want to recommend to you. They're not classics in any way, but again, the whole idea of this show is to broaden your understanding of the idea of unionizing the working person and the plight that they have against perhaps an oppressive company or, shall we say, corporate. That seems to be more the language of today. But Danny DeVito directed Jack Nicholson in Hoffa, and he did a pretty good turn. The film is not fantastic, but again, and we get into that sort of gray area where, you know, there's corruption, there's misuse, and there's maybe going a little bit too far as protecting the workers. But Nicholson's pretty great as Jimmy Hoffa, as you know, the head of the Teamsters Union, and worth looking at. Another film with our guy Sly Stallone, Fist. It's actually spelled with little dots, F-I-S-T, and takes place in the 30s, and again takes on the subject of unions.
Yeah, Fist was. I had seen this film recently. I found a copy at my man Roman's Castaways in Morro Bay, and I brought it home. Norman Jewison directed this, and I think it's the film that came out after Rocky and after the wrestling film Paradise Alley. And this is kind of a fictionalized Hoffa-type situation. He plays Johnny Kovac. This was quite good. I was kind of taken aback by how good it is, because he's for the working man, and he has to go into a gray area to get what he needs done. And it's kind of an interesting analogy, because he's still on the right side, even though he has to do bad things. Of course, he's up against, early in the film, the companies are trying to kill guys that want rights. So he's got to play rough as well. Fist is an interesting film. Definitely worth a look.
So in line with the films we've recommended tonight, Hoffa and Fist are worth seeing. And if you need a better understanding or maybe a different perspective on the idea of unions and the working man or woman, check out the films, and also the films of Farley Granger. We hope you've enjoyed tonight's somewhat 2-part subject edition of Take Two. We'll be back with another edition next week.